Hi everyone, welcome to the TriEssence martial art channel. Firstly, I'd like to wish everybody a happy Lunar New Year. Now notice that I say lunar instead of Chinese because China isn't the only country that celebrates this calendar. For example, Korea, Southeast Asia, there are many other countries that celebrate this calendar New Year. And recently there's a bunch of Chinese who got really upset that the Koreans refused to call it Chinese New Year in their own country. They want to call it Korean New Year. A bunch of Chinese got very upset about that, which personally I think is stupid because they're not part of China, therefore obviously they're not having a Chinese New Year, they're having a Korean New Year, which is why I believe, we should just call it a Lunar New Year. And I believe also in this world we need more tolerance, right?
Just call it a Qing New Year.
Qing is Chinese.
No, Qing is yellow. Okay, Yellow New Year.
That's racist.
Tolerance, hello? What the hell, man? That's not racist.
Yeah, so the world should be a better place if we are more tolerant about culture and cultural differences. However, martial art world is a different story, right? I mean, tolerance is a good thing, but in martial art world, ultimately it comes down to whether something works or doesn't work. And if it does work, how efficient it is. And under these conditions, tolerance is not going to get you very far. You need to be efficiency and practicality. That's what really matters. And with that, we're going to go into today's topic of our Kung Fu Debunked. We're going to talk about the efficiency of a side stance. Now, you're from Hong Kong, right?
Yeah.
So did you grow up with the Shaw Brothers, Kung Fu movies,
Well, funny enough,
Gordon Liu.
I wasn't allowed to watch it because, well, first of all, I wasn't born back then. I've got no idea. Sorry, I'm 18 and older.
Right.
But anyway, so yeah, no, I wasn't quite allowed to watch those movies because apparently it's considered bad for kids. That kind of,
Okay.
yeah. But yeah, but later on when I watched it when I was a bit older, so when I grew up, no, I haven't watched it. But,
So you know those Shaw Brothers stuff?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. And do you recall, the type of stances they take when they, do the fight scenes?
Well, yes, yeah. But I don't know. When you say stances, right? I mean, the problem is that the camera and the camera movement and etc. is so confusing. I didn't see much, but yes, they were doing this whole step back and do this, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So if you have ever watched Shaw Brothers movies, like the old golden age kung fu movies, you'll notice that they adopt a lot of side stance where they stand like this and they'll have the hands here, and they will be doing stuff like this, then like that, then jump forward, then punch, and then jumps back, etc. And further on, if you look at the Bruce Lee movies, right? Bruce Lee didn't make that many movies, but I believe in all the movies that he did, make the couple movies that he did make, he also adopted a side stance. I mean, if you remember, right, he always have a signature stance like this, or wherever the hand goes, but the legs like this, and he'll kick and come back, and then do stuff, right? So these are all derivatives of a side stance, which is basically a stance where you stand like a horse stance, but you're facing the side. So recently, someone asked me to comment on a video, and that's what got me the idea to talk about the side stance. So let's first watch the video that I was asked to comment on.
This is Chinese Kung Fu, specialty, side part.
Potere Kung Fu, la forza laterale.
Non
siamo frontali, si sente di lato, anche perché sennò sei più forte di noi.
Not like this, punch, fight.
Non siamo mai
So Chinese Kung Fu look very stupid. Kick my body, punch my temple. No, boxing, you see, like all, counter, right? Chinese like punch my face, single whip.
Sta dicendo, pensate che i figli siano stupidi perché stanno
Punch my face, kick my groin, punch my desk point, and stupid. So many people think, how punch? Fight a single whip. How you can fight, Betty? It's like this is a danger, This is not give you to punch. This is I attack you. This is. So he punch.
questo qui.
This now.
Quando ti attacco.
I like this. Kick my groin. And this broken arm, it will attack. This punch you out. So how you can punch me? I'm covered. I'm sideways. I'm not here. I'm side. You can punch from the side of power.
Quindi questa forza al potere laterale.
So that's why you bump out.
Alright, so this video apparently is from someone who's quite a recognized master in the West, okay? Now obviously in my channel, I don't really care about certain person's reputation or how famous or recognized he is. We're here to look at hard facts, right? Reputation doesn't automatically mean everything he think and say or teach is correct. If the fact is against whatever he claims, I will take facts and logic and reason over reputation. So in this video, he's basically saying that people often think that in Kung Fu you have these side stances that why you want to take a side stance. If you stand like this, someone's going to punch you in the face, kick you in the groin. So he said, okay, so that obviously not the point, is to stand like this to a person. He says that side stance is used for attack. So if you were to throw a punch, you basically standing here, you do this, and you come here, and then you either elbow him, throw him over, or do whatever you want. Then that's basically his reasoning for why Chinese martial arts have a side stance. Now, the problem with this explanation, okay, is that you assume the other person is also in a side stance. So if you're in a side stance, right, like in the Shaw Brother Kung Fu movies, a wider stance.
Well, comes up to the crane stance.
No, you can't do the crane.
Oh, come on. Okay.
So if he's also in a side stance, which is relatively harder to shift. Okay, if you're in this kind of stance with your weight distribution and the width of your leg, it's harder to shift around. So if you were to throw a punch here, it's enough time for me to come into this position without him escaping it. And that will enable me to elbow him or hit him or whatever I do. But even then, right, this punch is still a problem. Because that's assuming I can catch this punch in mid-air. Which, if any of you have ever been punched for real, you'll know that's almost impossible, okay? I mean, even if not a pro boxer or a pro fighter, if someone who just knows how to jab, the jab is pretty fast, right? It's gonna come like this. So for you to catch this in mid-air is pretty much impossible, okay? And even if the guy doesn't pull the punch, it's still gonna be fast, and it's very hard to just grab that thing out of the air. Which is why the first problem with this explanation is that the first condition cannot be met. You can't just grab somebody's punch and hold it there, right? Especially if he's gonna have a habit of punching and pulling back, which everybody should by now, even though who doesn't train, who watches UFC or boxing, they know that when you punch, you pull it back. You don't just punch like in the Kung Fu movies. So chances are, okay, when the punch is coming out, you attempt to grab. Even if you did grab it, the punch is on its way to pulling back, which makes it very hard for you to hold this punch in this position. And the moment it comes back, then that window of opportunity is gone. It's too short to actually be capitalized. The next problem is that you can't assume people are still in a side stance these days, alright? I mean, unless he's like a Bruce Lee fan or like, a Shaw Brothers fan, no one still on street fight like this, okay? Everyone's got a narrower, more mobile stance. And the problem with that is if you throw a punch and hypothetically, for some miracle reason, I grabbed it, from here to actually get to this stance, it takes time, okay? Because my step is quite far from the position I'm trying to get to. It's unlike I'm shifting a step here, which is quicker, but to get this and the body actually facing this way, so to get this body rotation, and then the leg cover all this much distance to get to the position. All you have to do is just to shift that leg a little bit to that way, and he can load me with that punch to my face, like a hook, right? Like a hook, or even whatever other punch he chooses to do. And this one will be pulling back, and that one will come for my face or for my ribs. It doesn't matter. The point is, it's far easier for him to just shift that little distance than for me to come here and rotate all the way here to catch him in this stance. So unless he's also fixated on having a stance like this and isn't toward the concept of shifting your angles, you can never catch a guy by going into this side stance and having him not moving, that you can elbow him and then throw him off balance. So that's why this whole thing, it doesn't work. So then you might ask, why does Chinese martial art have a side stance, right? Why do you see it in the Shaw Brother movies, in Bruce Lee movies, and why so many people even today still teach the side stance? And I'm not joking, there are still martial art schools out there, if you see their students spar, they spar like this. They'll do that, they'll do this. So why do people still do that, right? It's because that originally in Chinese martial arts, it did implement a heavy emphasis on the side stance. And this can be traced back all the way to the Ming Dynasty, okay? So for those of you that don't know, hand-to-hand combat was never a big thing until the Qing Dynasty. So that's after the Ming Dynasty. And it's toward the end of the Ming Dynasty where hand-to-hand combat become more and more popular. And we know this because one of the most famous military generals, Qi Ji Guang, during the late Ming Dynasty, has wrote about it, okay? He has said that he's the first one that we know of that actually written in his text talking about anti-fist combat. And in this text, he says that at the time, he's checked all the famous people that does anti-hand combat, and he's saying that they each have their own uniqueness and strengths, but none of them are complete. And furthermore, they're not important enough to serve a purpose in military training, which is where his interest primarily lies. So why do I bring up Qi Ji Guang? Is because he later on wrote a text called Quan Jing Jie Yao, which basically is what we can translate to the first classic summary. And a lot of the martial art systems that came in the Qing Dynasty based a lot of ideas from his book. And in his book, you can basically see a heavy emphasis on the side stance. And why is that? It's because he actually believed that anti-hand training is a precursor to weapon training. So he only taught his soldiers anti-hand stuff to prepare them for weapon fighting, okay? Because hand-to-hand fighting in military are useless. And why do you need side stance in weapon fighting? It's actually quite simple. So if I have a staff, which in the military it will be a spear, right? So I'll be holding it this way, and obviously the spear will be much longer than what I'm holding now. Unfortunately, it's only length I can fit in my car. So in a military setting, you want to hold the spear and have your body in a side stance, because you see, when I'm saying like this, I minimize the amount of surface the other person can attack. And this whole line is then protected by my weapon. And furthermore, if he comes next to me, he can stand quite close to me, holding another spear. And then we can have a full formation of people in a very close distance, right? If you have a wider stance, you see that's the problem. First of all, even in this kind of stance, we can't swing this weapon sideways because I'm going to swing into him. So that's not practical. And also I'm giving a larger surface that other guy can attack, which is why in a military setting, this is the most logical approach. You charge forward, you stab people, you charge back, you stab people, and that's it. Now, the same goes for short weapon. Of course, short weapon were not really the focus in the military setting, right? But as weapon from military became more civilian-oriented during Qing Dynasty, short weapon became more important because you can't carry a spear walking around, right? Not everybody is like Li Shuwen, who's crazy enough to carry a spear even to the shower. So short weapon become more important for civilian life, And again, if I have a short weapon, right, this is not just in China, even in the West, HEMA, fencing, European fencing, you can see the same concept. You want to stand in a side stance. So again, you minimize this attack surface your opponent has, and everything you have in front is guarded by your weapon. And also in doing so, have more reach, right? If I'm standing like this, the reach is not as far as if I'm standing this way, right? And in weapon fighting, every inch of reach matters. If I'm standing here and trying to stab someone, and he's standing in a side stance, he will get to me before I get to him, which means he will win. Which is why, in most of the weapon styles, you want to maximize your reach and minimize your attack surface, which is why, again, side stance is the way to go. You want to step this way and step back, and then do whatever you can with your weapon. Now, the rise to hand-to-hand combat, which happened around the late Ming to early Qing dynasty, these people, they didn't just come up with hand-to-hand combat, right? They had to base it off something, which is the military training that Qi Guang and others like Yu Dayou and people later on developed. So naturally, when you've been using weapon in the military your whole life, when you retire, you come home, you decided to figure out a way to fight with your hand, you naturally would go back to what you know, which is a side stance, okay? Which is why most of the early pioneers of Chinese external martial arts, they have a side stance. And one of the biggest group of them is what we call the Northern Long Fist variant. And you can see very classically that they always have a stance here, so do this, do that, here, punch here. So it's always a side stance.
拳术上跌、摔、打击、擒拿等许多方法。
Some people practice for health, and some practice for self-defense, some practice for the art. There are many styles of Kung Fu. No matter what style you practice, no matter what reason you choose for practicing, there's one thing that remains true for all of them, and that is there's no way of becoming good without a lot of time, a lot of practice.
And then they will punch in various ways. Now, this makes sense coming from a military background or military influence, because you've been training with the side stance your whole life, you naturally revert to this. But it does not mean that this is the best way to go about. The problem is, sure, you have a minimized surface that the opponent can attack. But the problem is, this first punch, it can't generate much power because you can't have the torque of your body. It only have most of the motion from your arm. And you might think, okay, that's fine because in boxing, jabs are like that too. But the bigger problem is that your heavy punch push from the back takes too long to get to the front. Okay, if you stand in a stance like this, you can lead with a punch like this, but the second punch is going to take forever to get to the guy. And when you do this, you're practically off balance in most of, depending on where your distance between the 2 feet are, but you won't be in a very good balanced position. So if you punch like this, the guy taps you, you are more likely to fall off. Which is why this is not really the most optimal way to fight with your hand. You cannot use your 2 hands simultaneously without delay. And same with kicks. If you stand in a side stance, it's very easy to kick the front leg, which is why Bruce Lee favored this stance. You can jump around and do his classical side kick. But it becomes harder to kick the back leg, because in this stance, your feet are basically this way, right? So to kick my back leg, I need to first rotate this leg. I have this foot. I have to turn and then do a kick. And if someone is skilled enough to recognize your kick by just the way you turn your foot, so it kind of telegraphs and gives away. And also, the motion for the leg to come this way is just too large and very easy to be spotted. Which is why, if you look at in more recent combat, especially like starting from boxing, right? They start to adopt a more mobile stance. Of course, boxing still has a wide stance. Okay, boxing doesn't have narrow stance, but it's functioning on its toes, and the feet are usually facing forward. It's not a stance where both feet parallel facing that way, right? It's not a stance like this, but the feet are facing forward. That's the first difference. And same difference, the weight distribution is not 50-50 in the middle, but depending on the boxer, right, each of them have different habits, but they should the weight be between them. And more importantly, their hands are not one way, so that both hands have access to the person, and they can do combos with both hands, right? Instead of doing a punch here and then a punch there, and then turn the punch there, which is really slow, they just come up and do that. And that makes it a much more efficient method of combat. And then if you look at kickboxing, Chinese version, which is Sanda, and the Muay Thai, they basically took the stance and made it even narrower because they favor kicks. Okay, when you are in a stance like this, it's harder to kick, and it's more telegraphed, like I was saying. So in Muay Thai, they have a stance where they're like this, so that they're easy to shoot up this front leg, and it's relatively fast to go with the back leg. And they can defend against other people's kicks. So naturally, they want a narrower stance. And in Sanda as well, basically Sanda was modeled off kickboxing and Muay Thai. That's why it also has a narrower stance. So this start changing again once it comes to MMA. In MMA, people favor a larger stance again. The reason for that is because in introduction of grappling, tackling, and ground games, right? When people are allowed to tackle to the ground, in the early MMA matches, right, like Vale-Tudo, all the Muay Thai guys and kickboxing guys, they still have this narrow stance. It becomes very easy for the Gracie families and other, jiu-jitsu guys to get into the ground because their feet are too narrow. So you do something to the front, and then you tackle, and then you double leg takedown, single leg takedown. You can do all of that with relatively ease. Which is why, as MMA developed, people realize that you can't fight someone that does jiu-jitsu with a narrow stance, so the stance became wider. However, that doesn't validate the Chinese old school side stance. Because again, if you look closely, in the modern MMA wide stance, of course everyone has different stance, so there's no one standard. But if you observe those famous fighters like Conor McGregor, John Jones, those people who favor a wider stance, you can see that their feet faces the front. It's not a sideways stance. Okay, so they basically still have the similar orientation to Sanda and Muay Thai, except they have a wider stance so that it's easier to sprawl and to avoid having both legs being taken down with. And sometimes you even see the hand structure that are very similar to Chinese side stance. For example, I think both Conor McGregor and John Jones sometimes on retreating they does this. Okay, which again almost look like the classic Chinese stance. The reason for that is because they basically distancing themselves, so when the guy is charging to punch me, it becomes harder, right? It becomes harder for them to punch, and you kind of pull yourself away from him so that you have the maximum amount of distance on retreat. But the difference is, this hand is still in the front. It's not like that, which is the classical Chinese side stance pose. So this is and it might look like it's more different, but it's all difference it makes. If your hand is here, or there, or anywhere like that, you're gonna get hit in the face. But if you are here and doing this, you are protected. And furthermore, it's far easier for me to retreat like this and then try to come back with the other hand than to retreat like this and then try to do something with the bad hand. So even though on some surface, these MMA stances looks reminiscent of the old Chinese side stance, but they're actually fundamentally not the same. And they function on a way more efficient scale. You can also see the same issue in Chinese martial art, right? If you look at the Southern styles, as they develop, a lot of the styles start to have a different stance. For example, Wing Chun no longer have a massive side stance. They choose to fight here, which is a very good evolutionary step. Because when you're fighting here, both hands can do combos rather than just having one hand here and then this hand having a difficult time to reach. All the haka styles, like Choga Mantis, Pak Mei, again, they also have a stance here, where their hand have equal access to their opponent. And in the north, you can also observe this with internal styles, right? For example, Xin Yi, which came from spear, but instead of a classical side spear stance, Xin Yi has Santi Shi, which is like this. And the reason they change from this stance to this is because in this stance, both hands have access, right? So if you put this spear down, you can see that then both hands have similar access to the opponent, whereas if you're like this, then the backhand is always having a delay. And Tai Chi as well, right? Even though in the Tai Chi form, it's hard to see that they actually moved away from side stance. For example, in Chen style, right, you can still see all these very obvious side stance. But that's because Chen style was the style that connects to Qi Ji Guang's first classic manual, which is why it still bears a reminiscence of the old days. But if you look at Yang style, firstly, they made the steps a lot narrower. Instead of a wider step that you see in Chen style, Yang style prefer a smaller stance, and that already shows you that they don't want this massive side stance anymore. And secondly, if you look at push hand, right? In Chen style, he doesn't do push hand, so we have to just pretend. They have a wide stance when they do push hand, right? They'll stand like me, and then they'll basically do something like this, and they'll come here or they'll do that. So this is like the way Chen style used to practice they push hand. But in Yang style, you can already see that they went from a narrower stance and the push happens here. Okay, this is one way, the other way is here. Even this one, they do it in a smaller range. And the most important practical push hand format is like this. And you can see in these stances, both hands have equal opportunity. It's no longer favoring one-sidedness, like the old ways. And this is not to say that Chen style is impractical or inferior to Yang style. It just shows you that this Chen style is like the link between the old way and the new way. So from this you can see that even in Chinese traditional martial arts, they were already moving away from the impractical side stance to a more practical two-hand equal opportunity kind of stance with narrow step that you can move around more easily rather than this lagging behind kind of setup. Which is why I find it very strange that there's still people today that are trying to go back to the old ways. See, unlike misinformed ideology, not all the old ways are better. The old days are not always better than now. Right? Things progress. It shouldn't regress. So just because someone did this 300 years ago, it doesn't mean it's better. Instead, you have to look at things logically, analyze it with reason, and then determine which way is more optimal. Anything to add?
No.
Alright, then that will be all for this episode of Kung Fu Debunked. Hope you enjoyed it and hope everything makes sense to you. If you enjoyed the channel, please subscribe. And recently I just been told that subscription doesn't actually always show you the notice. So if you want to know whenever I upload a new video, be sure to click on the bell icon. That's the only way that you'll be notified the moment I upload a new video and so you can keep up to date with the latest content on my martial art channel. And if you enjoy this content, you can also support me on Patreon. That will be greatly appreciated. As always, I'll give a shout out to all my Patreon supporters. Thank you so much for supporting me through this pandemic. And lastly, I'd like to give a special shout out to my two new Patreon supporters, J. Kim and Nasim. Hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Welcome to my Patreon family, and feel free to message me anytime with questions regarding any existing content, Patreon exclusive content, and suggestions for any future content that you wish me to cover on my channel. And now seeing here is actually a personal friend of mine from Germany. We met back in Beijing. He was also originally from the Zhenwu Martial Art Association. That's why I got to know him through my friend Renee. And later on he traveled to China and met his current master, I believe in the city of Dalian in the northeastern provinces. So he practiced a very rare lineage of internal martial art called 自然门. This is not to be confused with the conventional 自然门that made famous by Du Xinwu through Wan Laisheng, through his disciples up until now. Although this particular martial art that my friend Nazim practices have the same name called 自然门, from what I hear, it has nothing to do with Du Xinwu 自然门. And from what they do, it also has no resemblance. Instead, it looks more like a mix of Xingyi, Taiji, and other internal martial art. So even though they're not exactly the same as the three internal martial arts, but based on my own personal understanding and experience, I can see a lot of similarity, especially if you look at it from the perspective of the four fundamental forces of internal. So those of you who are interested, you should definitely check his channel out called 自然 space 门 to see what other legit internal masters are doing in their own lineage and style. And those of you that follow my channel, you should know that I don't hold high regard on most of the masters and practitioners that you see around on the internet, but Nassim's master is definitely one of the exceptions that I do believe represent a very high level of internal practice. And lastly, I'd like to wish everybody to stay safe and healthy, stay away from crowded areas if you can help it. So thanks for watching TriEssence Martial Art channel, and I'll see you next time.